Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Awesome Build, where today we're going to be making a rubber mold and then casting it using some casting resins. So first off, what's the purpose of making a mold? Well, as you saw in some of my past videos, like where we stabbed Malcolm in the eye with that pen and blood had to squirt out and stuff, I had to make a prosthetic. So I made a rigid mold using plaster, and then I could pour latex into it, pull out the latex, and then use that prosthetic. I basically did the same thing when I had to build the prosthetics for Doug when he did the Planet of the Apes review. I sculpted the features using some clay, and then built a box out of cardboard basically around it, and then poured in my plaster so that I could get my negative, and then I could pour my latex into this, and that's how I made the prosthetics for his monkey mask. So plaster molds or rigid molds are great for that kind of process where you're pouring something into it that is flexible that you can pull out. But if you're going to be making something that's rigid and going to stay rigid and you want to duplicate it, silicone molds are a better option. But when you're casting something or making something that's rigid, that can't bend and stuff like that, you want to make a mold that's flexible or make a silicone mold like this. So in order to do that, today we're going to be using a product by Smooth-On called Umu 30. Now there are a variety of different mold making companies out there, and you might be able to find some at your local art store, but Blix definitely carries a bunch of different mold making materials, and one of the more common ones that you're going to find is by Smooth-On. Now Smooth-On carries a lot of different products that are great for beginners and professionals. So today we're just going to be making a one-part mold, which is just like this, or these are just one-part molds. With a two-part mold, you have two separate pieces that you can pour your plastic into, and then you have a three-dimensional copy of whatever it is you want to make. And for an upcoming build, we actually are going to be making a two-part mold as part of the build. So I wanted to give you guys some kind of an introduction into mold making before we tackled that project. So that's basically today we're just going to keep it simple and just make a one-part mold using the Umu 30, and mostly because the Umu 30 is really easy to use. It's a 1-to-1 by volume ratio, which just means you have equal parts A and B that you mix together to make your mold. So the type of mold we're going to be making today is what I call a scrap mold. And what that means is when I am making a larger mold and I'm pouring my resin plastics into it, I generally want to make sure that I have enough. So I usually make a little bit more than I think I need so that I don't run out. But it cures very quickly, and casting resins aren't really that cheap, and I would rather not waste it. So I create a series of these scrap molds where I can pour the excess resin plastic into it and let it cure, and then I have some of these random parts and stuff like that that I can use for other builds and other stuff down the line. Like this one is just simply a bunch of bolt heads and screw heads and machine screws and stuff like that. I just took a bunch of bolts and machine screws and pushed them into a piece of clay. I mixed up a rubber mold, poured it in, and basically it fit like this. When it's secured, I can pull it out, and now I can pour my resin in there when I have excess, and then I have all of these little parts, these different machine screw heads and bolt heads and stuff like that, that I can use for dressing up other things. For instance, the spaceship corridor that we just built, a lot of those different paneling and pieces and stuff like that, you glue a bunch of these plastic bolt heads and machine screws to it. It really gives it a cool look and texture. It makes it look more industrial, and you don't have to waste real hardware. So essentially that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be making just another scrap mold. Instead, we're going to be making a box using some scrap foam board, and we'll glue our objects down to it, make the box using some hot glue, seal it up so that it's sealed tight, pour in our mold, and then give it about a day to cure, and then we're going to open it up and see what we've got. So we're just going to be using a bunch of these random scrap plastic pieces and stuff like that. I've got like half of a wall anchor that has an interesting shape and stuff like that. That's cool. It's flat on one side. Some different plastic pieces from toy car or something, or I'm not even sure where I got these, but it's some sort of end cap or something like that. I don't know, but I've got a few of these. I think they have an interesting look and shape. And for some of our future builds, like the spaceship corridor and stuff like that. We're going to be making a robot. We're going to be building model spaceships and stuff like that from scratch. We'll have all of these different kind of parts that I can use. Very ambiguous, and you can use them for multiple applications. And they're flat on one side, which makes them ideal for a one-part mold. All right, so we're going to cut out a chunk of our foam board here. That we can glue our pieces onto and then make our walls. And now you can use a little bit of hot glue or some double-sided tape to kind of just glue these down. I'll probably use hot glue for this one. I'm going to seal up all my edges so that when we pour our liquid rubber into it, it doesn't seep out. And make sure that you get all of the little stringy pieces out of there so that they're not laying across any of the pieces in your mold, because the mold will actually capture every single surface detail. All right, now that we have our box made and all of our pieces glued into the bottom of it, we're ready to mix our rubber mold and pour it in. All right, safety first. Make sure that when you're handling this stuff, you wear gloves and eye protection. All right, we're gonna open this stuff up. So we have our part A, part B. Container to mix it in. Some mixing sticks. I would suggest if you guys are gonna use this stuff, plan on using it all at once. Once you open it up, and even if you don't mix it together, but you just have equal parts open and you don't use everything, I would use it within the next few days of when you open it, because it does not have a very long shelf life at all. So whatever your project is, I would try and make it so that you're using all of the product up at once, or if you have like two separate projects or something, if you have two smaller molds that you want to make, then do them at the same time or within a day or two of each other, because you don't want to waste this stuff. A box like this costs roughly about $20 to $25, which isn't terribly expensive, but it's not super cheap either. So today we're going to be using all of it. So I'm just going to be pouring both these parts into our container. And you want to make sure you mix until you have a solid color. Now these two make kind of like a purplish bluish color. You don't want any marbling. We're going to pour it into our box, and make sure you pour it into just one corner very slowly. And it'll self-level. And then tap on the side of your box to force out those air bubbles. Or bang on the table. Banging on the table or tapping on the side of the box. It's a good way to get those air bubbles to rise to the top, because you don't want them to affect the outcome of your mold. All right, so tomorrow we'll see what we've got. We'll pull our box apart, pull our rubber mold out, and see what happens. All right, so we've let it cure overnight. So now we're gonna tear open our box and see what we got. Yeah, so we've got our pieces here we can pull out of our mold. So now we're ready to mix and pour in our resin plastic. All right, so what we're going to be using is Smooth Cast 325. It's another 1-to-1 by volume ratio of parts A and B. And so it's super easy to use, really easy to mix up and stuff like that. And the reason why we're using the 325 is because you can add pigment to it. You can add a colorant. I'm going to be adding a little bit of black to it. If you don't have to add any colorant to it, you can just use it. It comes out kind of with a little bit of a translucence to it. But then you can paint the surface any color you want. Doesn't really matter. So, but all right, so let's start mixing. All right, don't forget your gloves and your safety goggles, just in case there's any splash. You definitely want to wear gloves. You want to touch this stuff with your bare hands till after it cures. So again, we're just going to add equal parts of A and B into some cups. And I'm going to add a little bit of the colorant into part B before we mix. And then once we mix it up into a separate cup, get a good mix going, pour it right into our mold. And about 20 minutes to a half hour, we should have a pretty good cured mold. All right, let's do it. All right, that looks pretty good to me. We'll give that some time to cure. And yeah, then we'll pull it out of the mold and see what we got. All right, let's take a look at what we got. Let's see. Pretty good. Pretty cool, exact reproductions of our molds. And actually, I don't see any air bubbles really or anything. They came out really well. You can see it matched up to here's the original piece. And here's the one that we just made. Yeah, so these will be nice parts then to add to some other project. If I need little extra spare parts or whatever, these will be nice to have. And as I said, this will be a nice kind of scrap mold that I can use to pour some of my excess casting material into when I'm making something else. Once again, I hope you guys found this somewhat informative or entertaining, and I hope it inspires you guys to go out and do some stuff of your own. Make some molds, make some castings. It's pretty cool. It's pretty fun when it all kind of comes together, and then you have these parts and stuff like that. You can do it for scratch building or model building and stuff like that. You can actually, it's kind of fun when you sculpt something yourself, and then you make a mold of it, and then you can pour and cast it, and then you can have duplicates of something that you created, which is pretty cool. Once again, guys, thanks so much for watching. You guys are awesome, and don't forget to look me up on Facebook at James Jim J. Ross. And yeah, see you next week. We've got some cool stuff planned for the future. And as always, you guys rock. See you next time.